All right, so today I really want you to grab colored pencils because it's going to help so much. So I'm going to use green, purple, orange, and red if you want to follow along and use the same colors, okay? I promise you, using the colors really helps for this unit because the vocab is so intense. It helped students a whole lot in years prior. So today we're talking about domain and range. So again, remember domain is all X's and range is all Y's, right? So from our vocab the other day, domain is all the X's, we go from left to right, and then range is all the Y values, and we go from bottom to top. So let's start with the domain because we've done that first. So I have this chart here to help us out. We're going to start with domain. So first we're going to look at the left. So looking at the left side of our graph here. So here's the left side. And I'm going to draw a line straight down because again, we're looking at X's. And on the left here, we have a closed dot. The number we have is -7. Look on the right side. So on the right side, right here, we have an arrow. So the number that means if we have an arrow on the right side is a positive infinity. When we do the inequality, remember, we're going to have brackets. If we have a closed dot, it's going to be -7. And then our mouth with the line, because it's a closed dot, our X, because we're talking about X's. And then after that, if we have an arrow, we have just the mouth and the infinity. For bracket notation, we're going to have a square bracket with the -7. Miss Rawolf, why do we use a square bracket? Well, from our notes the other day, we used square brackets for closed dots. And we had an arrow, so that means we're going to use a round bracket for the arrow. So this time, instead of an X, I can just put a comma. And I'm going to be nitpicky about this comma. And then I have my infinity with a round bracket. Now for the range, we're going to talk about bottom to top. So at the bottom of my graph, so if I look at my graph, at the bottom, I have an arrow. And it's an arrow that's pointing down, so that's a -infinity. At the top, I have a closed dot at 8. So when I write this out, first I'm going to do my squigglies, because again, range looks at Y's. That's why we were looking at the top for the Y's and then this arrow. The arrow is first. We go from bottom to top. So I'm going to have -infinity and just a mouth. Instead of an X this time, we're going to use a Y because range is about Y's. And then we have a closed dot at 8. So I have a mouth with a line and then the number 8. For the bracket, we're going to have a round bracket with a -infinity because we're talking about arrows. My comma. And then the number 8 with a square bracket because it was closed. Let's figure out what's happening on the left side of the graph and then on the right side of the graph. Okay, so in this graph on the left side, looking at my x-axis, because remember, domain is all about the x-axis, we have a -7. And then on the right side, we have a +7. But we have a closed dot at the -7. And then at the +7, we have an open dot. So when I fill out my inequality notation for the closed dot, I'm going to have a -7 and then a mouth with a bracket. For the open 7, I'm going to have just a mouth and the number 7. For bracket notation, for a closed -7, we have a square bracket and a -7, comma. Open dot, we have that 7 with a round bracket. All right, now we're going to look at the range. So again, remember, range is all about Y's. So we're looking at the Y's. We're looking at the Y-axis this time. So figure out what's happening on the bottom. So fill out this top part here. Fill out what's happening on the bottom, what the number is. What's happening at the top, what the number is. All right, so in this one, we have a line that's happening, right? We have a line at the bottom. So remember from yesterday, a line uses the mouth with the line for inequalities, and then for bracket, it uses square brackets. So I'm going to put -8 and a mouth with a line. And then for bracket notation, let's do this all together. We're going to have a -8 with a square bracket. On the top, we have an open dot with the number 7 for the y-axis. So that means I'm going to have an open mouth only with the number 7 for the inequality. And then at the bottom here, after my comma, I'm going to have 7 with a round bracket. All right, so I want you to go through and see if you can do this without the stuff you fill out. I want you to try. I'm going to ask you some questions here. All right, so for the y's, right, I had to remember to put a y. As you can see, I accidentally put an x here, but it's y values. So if we have a line, that's a -8 because, see at the bottom here, we have a line. If we see a line from our notes yesterday or the first day, we have the line uses square brackets and the line uses the mouth with the line. So that's why I have -8, mouth with a line, and then I have a square bracket with my -8. Then I have my y and my comma. Then if I have an open dot at the top, right, because at the top here, we have an open dot at the number 7, because again, we're looking at the y-axis. Then we're going to have an open mouth with a 7 for the inequality notation. And then for the bracket notation, we're going to have a 7 with a round bracket. All right, so in this next one here, I want you to try and see if you can write the inequality domain and range by yourself and the bracket notation domain and range by yourself. Just remember, figure out what's happening on the left and on the right for the domain, looking at your x's. Figure out what's happening at the bottom and the top, looking at the y for your range. Okay, let's see if you end up with the same answers as me. Looking at this, range, if you messed up on range, I'm going to tell you why you messed up on range. So on the left here, we have a -6 with an open dot. So that's why we have -6 with a mouth and then -6 with a round bracket for our interval / bracket notation. On the right side here, we have an arrow, so that's a positive infinity. So we have an open mouth infinity sign and then comma infinity with the round bracket. For the range, all right, range looks at y's. Right here, we have an open dot and an arrow, okay? So if you wrote -3 here, I could see why you did that. And, you know, I like to be evil, but arrows beat out dots and lines. So this arrow is going to beat out, right? Because technically, this arrow can keep going down. So it will pass that open dot. So that's why it's going to be arrow with a negative infinity and the mouth only. And then we have round bracket with a negative infinity. At the top here, we have a line. So, and that line's at 7. So we have a line and 7. So that's why we have after our y, a mouth with a line and the 7 for the inequality notation. And then after the comma, we have a 7 with a square bracket. We're going to do more examples together in class. So hopefully before you get to this, we have a problem before you get there.